The first thing Sarah noticed was the silence. It wasn't the soft, comfortable quiet of a sleeping house, but a thick, absolute void where the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the gentle whir of the central air, and the digital glow of the microwave clock were abruptly extinguished. 1 second she was rinsing a plate under the warm stream of the faucet, and the next, she was plunged into a darkness so complete it felt solid. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she murmured, her voice unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. Outside the large kitchen window of their suburban Ohio home, the world had disappeared. No streetlights, no distant glow from the neighbors' houses, just an inky blackness punctuated by the frantic drumming of a summer storm against the glass. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the rain-lashed trees, casting monstrous, dancing shadows before swallowing everything back into the dark. She fumbled for the dish towel, drying her hands by feel. The power outages were infrequent but not unheard of in their neighborhood, especially during these violent August thunderstorms. Still, a flutter of anxiety, sharp and familiar, tightened in her chest. Being alone in the dark, it had never sat well with her, a remnant of a childhood fear she'd never fully outgrown. A soft thud from the living room made her jump. Then, the calm, steady sound of footsteps. Sarah. His voice, deeper than his father's, cut through the dark. "You in here?" "In the kitchen, Mark," she called back, trying to inject a note of casual reassurance into her tone. "The power's out. I think the whole block is down." The beam of a cell phone flashlight appeared, sweeping across the granite countertops before settling on the floor, illuminating his path. Mark, her stepson, appeared in the wide archway of the kitchen. At 22, he was a younger, more thoughtful echo of his father, Tom. He had Tom's strong jaw and warm brown eyes, but where Tom's gaze was often distant, preoccupied with spreadsheets and business trips, Mark's was observant, taking things in. He was home for the summer after his college graduation, a liminal space before he started his graduate program in architecture on the East Coast in the fall. "Yeah, I was just reading and my lamp died," he said, walking into the kitchen. He placed his phone on the island countertop, the light pointing upward and casting his face in dramatic relief. "You okay? You look a little spooked." "I'm fine," she said automatically, a little too quickly. "Just hate the sudden dark, and I was about to make some tea." "Guess that's not happening. We have a camp stove in the garage," he offered, "and I think there are some candles in the pantry." "Want me to look?" Before she could answer, another bolt of lightning flashed, a simultaneous crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the foundations of the house. Sarah gasped, a small, involuntary sound, and took an instinctive step back, bumping into the edge of the counter. "Whoa, that was close," Mark said. In the fleeting illumination, she saw his expression, not scared, but alert, concerned. His eyes found hers. "Seriously, are you okay? You're white as a sheet." "I just really don't like thunderstorms," she admitted, the confession pulled from her by the oppressive dark and the roaring weather. It felt strangely intimate, sharing this vulnerability with him. Tom would have chuckled, called her his scared little rabbit, and gone back to his book expecting her to manage it. Mark just nodded. "Let's get some light in here," he said, his voice practical and soothing. "Stay put." He moved toward the walk-in pantry, his phone beam leading the way. Sarah stood in the near dark, listening to the storm and the rustling sounds of Mark searching shelves. The darkness wrapped around her, and another peal of thunder made her flinch. It was in these moments she felt the strange geography of their family most acutely. She had married Tom when Mark was 15, a grieving, gangly boy who had lost his mother young. Their relationship had been polite, careful, a slow navigation of boundaries. She was the friendly adult in the house, not a replacement, never a mother. And now he was a man, a thoughtful, capable presence filling the silent kitchen. "Found them," Mark announced, emerging with a box of long, tapered candles and a ceramic holder. "And matches. Always be prepared, right?" He set them on the island and struck a match. The small flare was blinding, then resolved into a warm, dancing flame. He lit 2 candles, the light pushing back the darkness to create a small, golden pool around them. It was enough to see his face, the earnest set of his mouth as he concentrated, and the vast, shadowy expanse of the kitchen beyond. "There," he said, blowing out the match. "Better?" "Much," Sarah said, and she meant it. The candlelight was soft, alive. It felt safer than the sterile white of the overhead LEDs ever had. "Thank you, Mark." He leaned against the opposite side of the island, the candlelight flickering in his eyes. "No problem." "So, is this a childhood thing? The storm fear?" She wrapped her arms around herself, a self-soothing gesture. Yeah, I got locked in a basement during a tornado warning when I was 7. The lights went out, and I was down there for what felt like hours. It's silly. It's not silly, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Phobias aren't logical. They just are. My roommate in college was terrified of ceiling fans, absolutely convinced one would fly off and decapitate him. Despite her nerves, Sarah laughed. Really? Swear to God. We had to live in a historic dorm with radiators to accommodate him. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, more like the boy she'd first met. The shared laughter hung in the air between them, a delicate thread in the charged atmosphere. They fell into a comfortable silence for a few moments, listening to the rain begin to slow from a frenzied drumroll to a steady patter. The worst of the storm was passing. I'm going to get a glass of water, Sarah said, needing to move, to break the strange intensity of the candlelit stillness. Want one? Sure. She turned to the cabinet, but in the uneven light, misjudged the distance. Her shoulder brushed against his chest as he had also shifted to get out of her way. Oh, sorry, she said, stepping back quickly. It's okay, he murmured, but the space was tight between the island and the counter. As she reached up to open the cabinet, he moved to lean back against the island, and somehow, in the dim, confusing light, they moved into each other's space again. This time, he was closer. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the clean scent of his laundry detergent and something uniquely him, soap and old books. She froze, her hand still on the cabinet knob. He didn't step back. The world shrank to the circle of candlelight. The storm, the house, her marriage to Tom, all of it receded, leaving only the two of them in this intimate, breathless bubble. She turned her head slowly to look at him. His face was inches from hers. The candle flame reflected in his dark eyes, which held an expression she couldn't decipher, not predatory, not leering, but profoundly focused, and filled with a turbulent, unasked question. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, traitorous rhythm. This was Mark, her stepson, a boy she'd watched grow up. But the man standing before her was no boy. He was a solid, real presence, and the air between them crackled with a tension she had never, ever allowed herself to acknowledge. Sarah, he said, her name just a whisperer, breath that she felt more than heard. It wasn't stepmom or Sarah in the casual way he usually said it. It was laden with something else. Panic, hot and sharp, sliced through the strange enchantment. This was wrong. This was a line that could never, ever be crossed. A line that, in this dizzying moment, she realized had grown dangerously faint over years of quiet companionship and mutual respect. She took a jerky step backward, her calves hitting the lower cabinet behind her. I should go check the fuse box, she stammered, her voice thin and unconvincing. A complex emotion flickered across his face, understanding, regret, a hint of shame. He straightened up, putting clear, definitive space between them. The spell was broken, but the room felt different, as if the oxygen had been permanently altered. It's not the fuses, he said, his voice back to its normal, practical tone, though slightly husky. It's the whole grid. I already checked my phone. The outage map shows the whole neighborhood is dark. Right, of course. She smoothed her hands down her jeans, a useless gesture. Well, I think I'll just go sit in the living room. Wait for the power. I'll stay in here, he said, looking down at the candle flame. Read my book or something. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and picked up one of the candles. Her hand trembled slightly, making the flame shudder. As she walked out of the kitchen, she felt his eyes on her back, a tangible weight in the shadowy hallway. The living room was a cavern of looming shapes. She set her candle on the coffee table and sank onto the sofa, pulling a throw blanket around her shoulders. What had just happened? Nothing, she told herself fiercely. Absolutely nothing. A trick of the light, a moment of shared fear, a simple accident of proximity. But the memory of his warmth, the intensity in his eyes, the way he'd said her name, it played on a loop in her mind. It was followed by a crushing wave of guilt. Tom was in Cincinnati for a 2-day conference. He'd texted earlier about a tedious dinner with clients. Her loyal, kind, somewhat distracted husband. The thought of him felt like a lifeline, and she grabbed her phone, its screen a bright, cold rectangle in the warm candlelight. Power's out. Big storm. Hope your dinner is more exciting than sitting in the dark, she typed, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. His reply came a few minutes later. That stinks. Hope it comes back on soon. Dinner is boring. Home tomorrow afternoon. Love you. Love you too, she typed back. The words felt like ashes in her mouth. The rest of the night passed in a strange, suspended state. The power returned an hour later with a startling burst of light and sound, the house jerking back to life. She heard Mark in the kitchen, blowing out the candles, putting them away. He called a quiet goodnight. Sarah up the stairs before retreating to his basement apartment. She lay awake for hours in the suddenly bright bedroom, the sterile glow of the digital clock mocking her. The incident in the kitchen replayed in her mind, not as a fleeting moment, but as a crossroads. She had felt it. Something had shifted, something profound and dangerous. And the most terrifying part was the part of her, buried deep beneath layers of propriety and duty, that hadn't wanted to step away. The next day was a masterpiece of awkwardness. Tom returned, full of stories about his trip, and Sarah poured herself into the role of the welcoming wife, a performance that felt hollow. Mark was polite, helpful, his usual self, but there was a new wariness in his eyes when they briefly met hers. A silent agreement passed between them. It would never be mentioned. It had been a moment of madness, a product of darkness and weather. It was over. But it wasn't. In the weeks that followed, Sarah became hyper-aware of him. The sound of his footsteps, the low timbre of his voice on the phone, the way he would absently run a hand through his dark hair while reading at the dining table. The careful distance they now maintained felt more charged than their previous easy rapport. Every casual interaction was layered with the unspoken memory of that night. One afternoon, Tom was playing golf, and she found Mark in the backyard, sketching in a large notebook. She went out to tend to her herb garden, a task she used to enjoy in peaceful solitude. Now, his silent presence a few yards away felt overwhelming. He looked up after a long while. "I'm applying for a study abroad fellowship," he said abruptly, "for next semester in Copenhagen." She paused, her hands in the soil. That's wonderful, Mark. A great opportunity." "Yeah," he said, closing his notebook. "I think it's for the best. To get some space, new perspectives." Their eyes met, and the understanding was complete. He was leaving, not just for an education, but to break this unbearable tension, to protect the family they both loved. His decency in that moment made her heart ache with a confusing mix of grief and admiration. "I think your father will be very proud," she said softly. "I hope so," he replied. He stood up, dusting off his jeans. "I should go finish the application." The night before he left for Copenhagen, Tom threw a big, cheerful farewell barbecue. The house was full of friends and relatives, laughter and music. Sarah played her part perfectly, the proud stepmother, circulating with plates of food, smiling until her face hurt. Late in the evening, as the party wound down, she escaped to the kitchen for more ice. Mark was there alone, washing his hands at the sink. The noisy backdrop of the party insulated them. He turned off the water and dried his hands, looking at her. The air grew still. "I want you to know," he said, his voice low and earnest, "that I have nothing but respect for you and for my dad. What happened that night in the dark, it was a mistake, a moment out of time. It won't ever happen again." Tears, sudden and hot, pricked at her eyes, not because she was losing something she could have had, but because he was articulating the truth with a maturity that humbled her. He was choosing the right path, the honorable one, and in doing so, was showing her the way. "I know, Mark," she said, her voice thick, "and I respect you tremendously for saying that, for being who you are. You're going to do amazing things." He gave her a small, sad smile that held no flirtation, only a deep, abiding affection. "Take care of him, Sarah. He needs you." Then, he did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her in a firm, heartfelt hug. It was a hug of farewell, of gratitude, of closure. It was clean and true, devoid of the charged electricity of that night in the kitchen. She hugged him back, fiercely, letting a single tear slip into the fabric of his shirt. "Be safe," she whispered. He pulled away, nodded once, and walked back out to the party, to his father, to his future. Sarah stood in the bright, busy kitchen, the sounds of her husband's laughter drifting in from the patio. The ghost of that dangerous, silent moment in the dark had finally been laid to rest, not by pretending it never happened, but by facing it with courage and choosing love, the broader, deeper love of family. She took a deep, cleansing breath.